A Russian nuclear defense force minister over in Moscow was killed by Ukrainians from an e-scooter. Check it out.
Breaking overnight, a senior Russian military official has been killed in an explosion in Moscow. Ukrainian security sources tell CBS News that they were behind this assassination. Officials in Russia say Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov and his assistant died after an explosive device on a scooter detonated near an apartment building. For more on this, we're joined by CBS News reporter Haley Ott. Haley, what can you tell us about what happened?
Good morning, Errol. Yes, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov was the head of Russia's nuclear and chemical defense forces. And investigators say he and his assistant were killed near the entrance of an apartment building in Moscow this morning by a bomb which was hidden in an electric scooter. Russian state media says the bomb had the power of about 300 grams of TNT and was detonated by remote control. Jesus. Now, Kirillov and the unit he headed were under sanctions by a number of countries, including the U.S. and the UK, for the use of chemical weapons on the battlefield in Ukraine. And just yesterday, he was charged in absentia there. Ukraine security services saying it's recorded around 4,800 uses of chemical weapons by Russia since its full-scale invasion in February 2022. In particular, from grenades, which are equipped with toxic substances and then dropped on Ukrainian troops from drones. Ukrainian security sources have told CBS News that Ukraine's SBU was behind the attack, killing Kirillov in a, quote, special operation and calling him a war criminal and a legitimate target. Russia has called the bombing a terrorist act. Errol?
All right.
So what's happening over in Russia is, or Ukraine and Russia, because we don't really get reports from what's happening inside of Ukraine anymore. I remember reading a detailed account of what was happening over in Ukraine. And a lot of people are so privileged here in the United States of America that they don't know what it's like to have war on their own soil. I remember reading a report that was basically saying that when Russian troops was severely occupying Ukraine, and this is why I'm so against this current administration, this Biden-Harris administration, and the Democrat Party that are basically architects of war, in my opinion. I remember reading and going into a detailed account of how when Russian troops was inside of Ukraine, that obviously they would go door to door and they were killing most of the men or taking them hostage and removing them. And they didn't care about the wives or the daughters or anything like that. And so right now, what you see over in Ukraine is there's a lot of women that are actually having Russian babies because they were basically taking advantage of the women, doing them, using them. Obviously, they weren't using a condom. They wasn't worried about contraception whatsoever. But they were using that as a way to continue to keep the troops motivated because it was likely that they were going to die, or they didn't know when they were going to die, or they were starving. And so in order to keep the troops motivated, they were over there using the women as punching bags and as footstools, both physically and emotionally. And they were basically impregnating the women. And if they didn't kill them, then they were going to just let them have their babies and leave them to be. So a lot of people are not familiar with what happens in these wars because the only thing that you see is what happens from the national media. But there are reports and there are deep dives as to how the women or how the lineage is completely changed from what's happening over in Ukraine, which, again, this feeds more into why I am so against the war, because the ones at the top that order the troops on the ground, which that is ultimately a last resort, and why I voted, part of the reason why I'm a Republican now and why I stand for the Republican Party is because they don't believe in war. People just keep saying, oh man, Ukraine got to fight them or whatever. That's because you're not out there. That's because you're not familiar with what the face of war is. You watch a movie, you watch Give Us Free, and you think that you oppressed. No, real suffering and real oppression is happening throughout the world, and it's all for profit. It is all for profit. It is completely avoidable, and it is all for profit.
Breaking overnight, the leader of Russia's nuclear protection forces killed in a bombing in Moscow. Russian officials say the bomb was hidden inside an electric scooter and detonated remotely outside an apartment building today. The Russian general was wanted by Ukraine for using chemical weapons. A source with knowledge of the operation telling CNN Ukraine's security service was behind the assassination. Max Foster joins us live now from London with more on this. Max, good morning. A remarkable event here. Tell us more about who this general is and why the Ukrainians wanted to do this.
Well, what a brazen assassination on the streets of Moscow, just 4 miles from the Kremlin, a remote-controlled bomb planted on an electric scooter.
How did they know that he was going to be riding a scooter is what I'm trying to understand. That's the part that I'm trying to figure out is like, how did they know that that was his scooter? Was it a Lime scooter? How did they know? And how did they get so deep into Moscow to where they were able to actually plant that bomb? You know what I'm saying? I want to know the details. Don't just give me the propaganda. Don't just give me the cover story. I want to know the details of what happened and how they were able to get to this guy outside of an apartment building. And they knew that he was going to be the one that ride the scooter.
They got their man because very quickly we heard from sources within Ukraine that this was a revenge attack.
Oh, shout out to Red.
This was
Reggie Red
a general who ran the forces
Stick around,
that
big dog. I know you
look
subscribe.
after the nuclear weapons, the chemical weaponry. And the Ukrainians had very clearly accused him specifically of ordering the use of chemical weapons effectively on the battlefield against the Ukrainian military. So they targeted him, they got him just 4 miles from the Kremlin, as I say. So a massive breach of security for the Russians. We wait to hear their response. But you could call it a triumph for the Ukrainians, but there will be a response as well to this.
Of course there's going to be a response.
Well,
Somebody got to pay for this.
Max, I mean, this is an intriguing time, I suppose, for Russia, considering, of course, the fall of Assad in.
I know that he wasn't riding a scooter. I'm exaggerating the situation. What I'm saying is, how do they have Ukrainians, or is it paid people, or what is going on? Like, I want to know the details of the attack in general. How did they know that he was going to be walking by that particular spot? How did they know when to detonate it? How did they know it was actually him? Who was watching him at the time? Do they have Ukrainian spies or spies from the United States of America? Who was over in Russia? How did they get so deep into Moscow? That's my whole point. My point is that this is not something that they just randomly stumbled upon, right? This is something that was planned extremely well, meticulously from people that obviously were pros at what they do. I want to know the details. I don't want to just hear the surface level, oh man, he was killed by a scooter attack. How?
In Syria, where, of course, Russians were, they've given him
correct 4 miles
asylum
from the
there, and
that's crazy.
Putin making an appearance in public without even mentioning what was going on there. Really, in many ways, an embarrassment for them and potential security problems since they have access to a warm water port through Syria. Now something like this, and to have the Ukrainians talking about it in public, it seems like Putin is under some pressure, no?
Certainly. I mean, Syria was, Russia's only base, really, a reliable base within the Middle East. They've still got their military installations there. I'm sure there's some negotiation going on between the Syrian regime, as it is now, and the Russians about protecting those assets, whether or not they'll be able to stay. But losing, under major pressure within Syria, in the Middle East, also clearly under pressure in Ukraine. They have been pretty successful, though, on the battlefield.
Because you got to remember that this guy allegedly was the guy that was in charge of everything nuclear related, overseeing artillery, all of that type of stuff. So this wasn't just like a regular general or lieutenant or somebody that was high rate. Like he was that guy. You know what I'm saying? He was that guy. And this is 4 miles away from the Kremlin. I think that Russia is probably just biding his time. How do we know that Russia themselves didn't look at him as a traitor, or they were disappointed in the job that he was doing, and that it's not made to look like Ukrainians are doing this, and this is actually from the inside of Russia, that they were the ones that actually set this off? How do we know this? You know what I'm saying? Like, I've learned, especially when it comes to a lot of these reports on international fights and international war, I've learned to start questioning everything, to not just believe, take it into consideration, but not just believe everything that's presented to you on the surface right away. I don't believe that it was just that simple. Oh my God, they sent Jason Bourne in. You know that guy on I think it was Russell Crowe and Jamie Foxx. And it was a movie where they were saying that the guy, they call him in when they want to have somebody killed and all of that. And somebody had wound up killing his family or something. And he came back and he wound up torturing them. And then he started chasing Jamie Foxx and all of that stuff. One of my favorite movies. I didn't like the ending. I thought the ending was absolutely trash. But that was one of my favorite movies. It sounds like he was one of the people that was in there that was taking care of the business on there.
Forward on those front lines. So they've been claiming triumphs on the battle in Ukraine, but this is a major blow, a big embarrassment, which does show some vulnerability to think that you could attack anyone in central Moscow as a Ukrainian agent. It's
Shout
pretty
out to y'all.
extraordinary, let alone
It's a great movie, Law-Abiding
a
Citizen.
top general who was specifically targeted.
Right. Well, and I mean, those electric scooters, they're all over cities around the world. I mean, what a sort of sinister use of that technology. But of course, all this, coming as the Russians are scrambling to take territory in Ukraine ahead of President-elect Donald Trump coming into office, and Zelensky mounting a charm offensive to try to win him over. Quite a complicated battlefield, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't believe everything that's just on the surface. 4 miles away from the Kremlin, I don't believe everything that's on the surface. So again, I'm just reporting the news on this one. We can put our conspiracy theory hats on and evaluate different things. But ultimately, I just think that war is not necessarily about territory. It's not necessarily about rights. It's always about money. Some way, shape, or form, it always comes back down to money. We're not battling for Taiwan because, we want to secure or really be against China. We battling for Taiwan because they're the semiconductor chip capital of the world. You know what I'm saying? It always comes back down to money somehow, some way.